Madhu, hi. Good to have you with us. How have you been?
Hey, great to have you on, in your show, Ashu.
I mean, this is an exciting discussion. This is a very interesting discussion. I've been at, I think everybody knows about this, right? I mean, I have this affinity and love for fintech as a space, and and all the startups that are operating in the fintech ecosystem, right? Be it on the lending side of it, be it wealth stack, be it new age asset ownership structures that are coming together, right? So I mean, I am in love with this space, right? And I started as a banker, right? And I did a startup, right? Not a lot of people know about it, but I did a startup in the fintech space in 2012, 2013, right? Which was a disaster, right? But and because a lot of infrastructure was not available, right? Thus, this conversation becomes very important because you're playing a very critical role in bringing this infrastructure, making this infrastructure available for many businesses, right? Empowering those businesses. So all the challenges that kind of existed, right? For a fintech company, for I think a financial services company to come together, I think you're taking away a lot of that pain, right? Thus,
Absolutely.
this conversation becomes very interesting in that context, right? But Balu, before we talk about M2P, right, of your journey about the product, right? I'd love you to take me, a quick round of introduction would be very interesting as a starting point, and from there
Sure.
we dive into all the aspects of M2P.
Sure. Yeah. As I said, thank you for having us on the show. We are a 7-year-old business. We turned 7 in November, and we started around the time when fintech was not a buzzword. Around the idea of germinated back in 2012, 13, where I used to run products at Visa. My co-founder was also my colleague back then.
Right.
And we realized that in our day job, we had to go out and work with banks, partners, and kind of
Right.
broker the marriage and make sure that the marriage doesn't sort of fall apart. But we just ended up having very long courtship period, right?
Right.
So every product used to take maybe give it 1 or 2 years to launch.
Right.
So some people made a career out of it, launching just one product and not. So therefore, we realized that it will. There was a need for somebody to actually sit in the middle and sort of make this better, right?
Right.
And that was a singular sort of insight that we had, saying that there are a lot of businesses that are looking to adopt payments in their workflow or make their customer experience better.
Right.
But while there was intent from bank side, the infrastructure that were there were not like forthcoming, right? And
Right.
also many of the payment products were built pre-mobile era, right?
Right.
So as app ecosystem evolved, as things kind of became increasingly mobile first, it was not even mobile first then, but people started looking at it, right? We realized that a lot of these products are not scalable in that format, right?
Right.
So therefore, we felt there's probably a need. I mean, the white space that we could, it was hazy back then, was that mobile bill is here to stay, because it was like 4 or 5 years into iPhone. There was, it's not going back, right? So basically, we said there is probably something that we could get out interest in an interesting format if we just keep executing on it.
Right.
And as luck would have it, part luck, part timing, and we kind of rode that wave. We had, thanks to whatever the government did at a macro level around demonetization, GST, it kind of led to a lot, formalization of the economy. And now COVID, which is
Right.
basically it is looking like making demonetization like a trailer, and this being a movie.
Right.
So all of these factors kind of played out to our advantage, and it created enough tailwinds for the business to sort of thrive.
Right.
While we started around payments, we realized that whatever work that we were doing was a lot more than just one aspect of a banking business, which is payment, right? So we said, if bankers are putting trust, allowing us to manage customers' money, which is central to their existence, right?
Right.
We said we can do a bit more, right? And the whole inefficiency around the tech was even more pronounced when it is not customer facing, right? By that, what I mean is, if you have a team managing operations process, if there are 40 warm bodies doing an activity, nobody in the bank thinks about how do I remove these 40 people and make it automated, right? If it is customer facing, you're going to go shout, put it on social media. If some other bank is doing this, competitive pressure or customer pressure to do it, or a regulator comes down and does something. Back office functions just the way they are. You would be amazed when man landed on the moon, there are systems and processes that continue to be there today, right? So, that's a bit of.
Surprisingly, but I started my career as a banker, right? So, and I can relate with a lot of what you're saying, right? And it used to be this mammoth institution with many people, right? Just moving files.
Yeah.
And it was surprising, right? And I think a lot of people on the outside who don't necessarily have a view in terms of what happens, right? They'll be flabbergasted with the entire construct of a banking institution. And I completely what you're saying, right? There is just so much inefficiency that exists, right? There's so much of information that exists in silo, and you're absolutely right when you highlight and when you allude that mobile ecosystem has been a different animal, right?
Yeah.
Which I think banking ecosystem was never prepared for. And I think one of the critical aspects and problems has been while of course technology and adoption is something that they've been sensitive to, and I think regulators have made it mandatory to sort of cover themselves on a few things, right? But I think mindset is a huge challenge, and I think we're going to talk about some of those challenges, right? Right, which have been there in the banking ecosystem, right? And not just in India but globally, right? There's a certain sensitivity. There is a certain delay that is brought in at an institutional level, right? Because, like I said, there are it's a large shift, right? Banking is not an easy business in that sense. But second question, essentially in line with my first one, right? I want to talk a little about your journey, right? I think fintech is a serious topic, right? But I think I want to have a little more fun, right, around understanding your journey, right? Understanding the aspiration, right? The early team coming together, right? The co-founders coming together. Would love to understand a little more, right? Because that's something which really I think powers any startup for a very different kind of, like I said, an aspiration, right? So I want to understand a little about your journey and then move into discussing the core product.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so we, as I said, we were colleagues who, amongst other many things over chai, we kind of realized this need is there. Right. And I was just foolish enough to leave that, cushy, high-paying job and say, let me give it a stab, right? So that's how. So we said we'll give it a couple of years. We'll see. There's always this safe harbor in terms of going back to our work, but. As we started sort of digging in and figuring out what is it that we can build and how we can sort of take it up. And there was a lot of exuberance back then, 2013, 14. This wallet story was just sort of beginning to take off. That was the first wave of fintech action and money pouring in and all that. So we felt that we were just overconfident with the fact that we would be able to raise capital and have a party. And I often tell this to people that. If it's like participating in Kaun Banega Crorepati, right? You can't ask the person to ask the 15th question and walk away with a 15 crore check. So you have to keep going every question and everything, point in time, you have to keep getting that right? So company building in many ways is that. So every question or every turn you kind of get, it can get difficult. You can phone a friend, you can seek help or cut out options. Effectively is that, right? So ultimately the holy grail being if you're able to take the company public, right? So that's probably is the big check in terms of outcomes that you can go sort of think about. But my co-founder and I, we kind of realized that this is like this is a problem that we could tackle, and we'll give it a couple of years. By then he had moved on from Visa and he had joined PayPal. And the third co-founder is my brother, who has been sort of toying with a bunch of startup ideas. And then when we said we're doing, and he's a technologist, so and he had just moved back from the US. So we said we're anyway building this, and I'm not the technology guy while we are a technology company. So we said more tech hands would help, and it was a kind of a big risk from a family perspective, because both of us and we come from humble backgrounds, so kind of said. There's a big chance that might fail, but we said that's the sort of fun part around starting up, right? When things sort of work well, you sort of look back and say, hey, we just were lucky. But I think the journey has been sort of incredible in the sense, while we said we will raise money and all, we never got that money. For the first 5 years, we were bootstrapped. And oftentimes, you kind of, what entrepreneurship has sort of taught me is to not take no as an answer. No, you have to look for alternatives. So we kind of got into a mental model where we said, we spent like a year and a half before that realization sunk in that nobody's giving us money, right? We by then we were like a 10, 12, 15 member team. We said we have to keep paying salary. So we kind of started doing things which were tactically making sure that we keep the lights on. But
Right.
there was a long-term sort of playbook which we were sort of building towards.
Interesting.
And in like 5 years time, like in 2019 is when we eventually went out and sought capital.
Right.
By then the infra business became, very hot, and there's been no looking back. We've done 4 rounds of financing,
Right.
and it's been an incredible journey.
Interesting. Madhu, this must be a special day, right? I mean, given that the Freshworks is getting listed, right, and that happens, I think now, right?
Yeah.
This must be a special day, right? From a personal standpoint and from a professional standpoint, what do you make out of an event like that?
Yeah, I mean, so nobody thinks about Chennai as a startup sort of hub, but thanks to what Zoho has done, what Freshwork and the mafias around these companies have done, they've put Chennai at the center of SaaS, business.
Right.
Incredible companies that are getting built here. We are in some ways, because SaaS also gets you better multiples from an investor standpoint. We also would like to think of us as a SaaS business, but
right.
I think each of these cities have its own persona in terms of we have people, like a lot of people. I mean, I'm sure you keep hearing this. Bangalore is very hard. People are just not not able to hire engineers and all.
Right.
We are like about 450 people now.
Right.
Our 450th employee would be like with an employee ID of 490 or 495, somewhere in that, right? So you had like 40 people leaving us in the last 7 years, right? So, so Chennai has this own vibe or aspect around people just sticking around, looking at it as as their own sort of baby and helping build that. So we've been sort of fortunate to have like a core team that has stuck together for sort of almost all through the journey. And we also sort of aspire to and Girish has done a phenomenal work in actually taking that business globally, right? And we have a lot of aspirations to go out and build this into an at least a pan-Asia business.
Right.
Therefore, we look up to them, and and whenever we get a chance, we hopefully we could also say that we went the way Freshworks. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible, right? And I think we've been raving about, and I think everybody, Indian startup ecosystem has been raving about the fact that we need many more Bangalores, right? But I think what we essentially need is many more Chennais, right, to come up, right? And I think because Chennai is essentially like a quintessential Indian tier 2 city, right? And you can find very clear similarities in cities like Chandigarh and cities like Jaipur. I think that's essentially what you're kind of also alluding to, right? I think we can have many Chennais to come up, right? And I think together we should really sort of evangelize that cause, right? But I think that's a discussion for a next different time. Madhu, I'm going to move into I want to talk a little about the product, right? Which is the serious side of our conversation today, right? On the outside, a lot of people don't necessarily understand what an infrastructure business is, right? I would love you to take me through the product construct, right? In terms of what are your core offerings, like who are the primary consumers, right? For many people who are going to be watching this, right? I mean, I want this to be like a lesson 101, right? On infrastructure, for their better understanding in terms of how companies like M2P are really sort of solving this for many fintech players, banking institutions to kind of deliver with delight, right? So tell me a little more about that side of the business.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'd probably start with an analogy, right? So 15 years ago, when you had cloud computing sort of coming in, right? AWS was born, and like 2005-6.
Sure.
A lot of people could not relate to what sort of cloud computing could sort of become, right? In the sense, large companies CTO offices used to boast about the budgets they had, the kind of data center they used to run. It was a power center, right? And for those businesses to actually give away that power that they could yield because of the fact that they have run such massive, budgets and like army of people managing that infrastructure. But, double click to today, you realize that barely any large business is actually running their own infra, right? And there's no going back to that old method of, assembling a unit. And in fact, bankers and, very, very serious businesses are moving to cloud.
Right.
So, it took us 15 years to get to this point where businesses, if you are a startup, if you have $100 credit card, you can virtually start an internet business, right? Back in early 2000 and all, almost 50-60% of that money went into infrastructure in terms of putting computers and all that. So, banking in general is at that cloud moment, right? When I'm not saying they will move to a cloud, AWS or anything,
right.
but the way banks buy technology is going through a rapid sort of change,
right.
Where how it used to be was, I will pay a large capex. Let's say I'm a bank, I'm implementing, let's say, a credit card product. I'll get 3 or 4, I get an RFP done, I'll get like 3, 4 parties, to quote and, and goes through a procurement process for 6 months or 8 months. And that is, that is dead, right? It's kind of, we are kind of accelerating that, because the fact that today banking will exist in some ways because it's regulated, it's got, it's people with money and, there is a, every market regulators view it differently and all. But the model in which products are rendered is changing rapidly, right? If you're ordering food on, let's say, Swiggy or Zomato, if there's a wallet function that is there, that's actually managing money, right? It could be powered by any bank. It could be their own wallet. You don't really care, right? So therefore, a lot of these day-to-day spend categories are already in our lives, which are, already financial services have got embedded, right? And it will only accelerate. Like in the US, if you see, Apple has taken over probably like 10-15% of credit card business, right? Google is attempting to take the deposit products through their, Google Pay account. And more and more of these use cases will come about, there will be, some, restrictions will be there. Like in our own example in India, while bankers manage the money, the customer-facing units are a PhonePe and a Google Pay and whatnot, right? So therefore, you'll have new storefronts that are getting created through which financial services products will get rendered, right? And you can't run that kind of products and distribution with a technology that was not meant to be that, right? So therefore, there is a transformation or a repurposing of tech that will happen where I'm not saying we'll go and replace whatever is already running. We would prefer to sort of run it as a parallel, because you don't upset the current Apple Card because there are a bunch of things that are happening, which are band-aid solutions that have got done, right? Like a bank will have some guy sitting at home wanting to approve like a loan request. They would have got that, right? So therefore, we won't upset the current ecosystem, but there's a phenomenal need to actually build capabilities for the bank where the control, whatever the regulatory requirement sits with the bank, but the distribution cohorts, customer experiences, user journeys can potentially get ported to any interface that anybody wants, right? So we are in that moment. We believe that branches will disappear. You'll all get into everything available on our phone. In some ways, neobanking is that's the promise, right? So we all keep about it. In markets like US and Europe, the basic banking itself is broken. Now India doesn't have the challenge, so we don't see that as apparent as what you see in the West, because in the West you have things like, even today in the US, if you send money, it takes 2 days to reach, right? So you can go around the world and come back before that money hits your bank account. So therefore, but in India, those problems never, have already been solved for this. UPI makes the money movement like real time, no cost. You can't make it any better than this. There's no arbitrage, right? So therefore, foundationally, problem solving would be around how do I make the customer experience better? How do I stitch different pieces of the jigsaw better? For which you need platforms like us, who basically go to banks and make that a thing work with them, and then you can focus on your business. So if you are a business, if I give you a choice of saying go work with the bank, spend the next 1 year trying to make it work, or come integrate with our APIs, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, you can put the product out in the market. You as a startup, or an entrepreneur, or even an established business would always go with our option, because that the certainty by the end of that year, you could have decided whether you want to scale up that product or not, right? So therefore, so we would find our relevance in sort of doing that. Hopefully, we get to that AWS scale at some point in the future.
Interesting. No, I think when you're saying what you're saying, right? I mean, there's clearly there's a clearly solution for both the sides, right? In that context, right? But I want to understand, right? Whose side are you on, right? Which is the side that you're representing?
So we are actually interestingly poised in the middle. So we call it we think of it like a two-sided marketplace, but effectively our sell is to the demand side. We believe that our calling and what we are solving for is that the fintechs and the businesses that are building out. When I say fintech, it's not just startups. we have very, very large, for lack of a better word, old school, old economy sort of companies, right? Who are essentially trying to move up the value chain because their customer cohorts have moved up, right? So somebody who's my driver and I, both of us are on Hotstar when there's a cricket match, right? So you are basically, technology has been a leveler, right? So therefore, maybe he taking a loan from, let's say, a TVS Credit or a Muthoot or someone like that.
Right.
Those businesses realize that there is a need to make sure that we offer products much as how fintech is sort of offering, right? So therefore, when we look at it as fintech, we look at it as a fintech as an idea and not so much about being a startup and stuff like that. So therefore, we have a lot of demand that is coming from even incumbent large businesses, which you would think that they are the ones that are likely to be disrupted, right? So therefore, we have that. So that is our demand side, as I call it. The supply side is regulatory supply. It could be balance sheet, it could be regulatory license, which are the banks. And we work with practically every large bank in India today. At least, for example, we work with two of the three largest banks in that region. So in every market, we realize that, and this is a shift that has happened in the last 4 or 5 years, where fintech used to be a fad, or bankers would laugh at it and say that, I don't want to invest. Now large banks are realizing that they don't want to miss out. So we have inbound coming in from larger banks now to say that we also want to offer this. Let's say, I'm just using it as an anecdotal example. We also want to offer BNPL as a product because we see that our customers are, going to ABC, companies that are offering this as a product, right? So there's a realization that that fad is kind of being looked at as a serious business, and which actually is very good, right? Because you will have, that's the piece around how you can, products can get scaled.
Absolutely. Madhu, very interesting, right? And, Madhu, I would love you to take me through the offerings that you have, right? Tell me a little more about that, right? Because I think whatever you're saying, right? I think it's important to sort of break it down at that level, right? So I'd love to understand a little more about, the core offerings that you have, right? If you could tell a little about the product stack, that'll be very helpful.
Sure. As I said, since we are serving the banks to meaningfully repurpose tech, everything outside of the core banking system. So if you're a retail bank product, it could be bank account opening, deposit product. So when we talk about deposit products, it's not just a traditional fixed deposit or RD. We sort of throw in gold as a deposit instrument into that. We kind of add other elements to it. So you as a consumer, let's say you are going through a brand which is offering deposit as an offering, you would have all of the choices that are out there and not limited to one bank. Maybe we'll have like 2 or 3 banks and, get that going. So, practically everything around the retail banking is available on our APIs. So you could launch credit cards on our platform. You could do payment products. You could do UPI, do cross-border payments. The idea is to, sort of have a representation of what all you can do with a bank or a tech infrastructure. And then it's an a la carte, right? It's, you may be building for a use case where, you say that I want this. And there are other aspects to that business. Things like, how do you do KYC? How do you manage, money flow? How do you manage treasury, if you're in an FX business? So all of these elements that go into running the banking business, other than the core banking, because core banking is kind of very, very, large implementation. It's a services business, which, large companies have already kind of got into it. No point in, actually.
And I think also the sensitivity around that core banking solution is very, very different, right? I think that's typically not something that I think any of the banking institutions want to touch, right? I think that's kind of been done. And like I said, there is just too much of an effort to
absolutely,
kind of move that, right? But Madhu, you essentially walked me to my next question, right? While of course I would love to understand about the consumer journey, right? But I think we can possibly answer that in just a bit, right? But I think what I essentially want to understand is the key challenges, right? Because when you're talking to financial institutions, right, there was a huge problem because something that we started right at the start of the conversation, right? That there has been a huge denial, right? There's been there's been a lack of seriousness, for example, right? A lot of this has been considered to be fad, right? Something that's mentioned, right? What are some of the key challenges? Mindset for me is the biggest challenge, right? But what are some of the other challenges, right? That you see have are extremely, critical in this entire scheme of things, right? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I think so. We believe that, and kind of a tangential sort of response, we believe that there will be businesses like ours which will get born because there's just, we can't do it all. There'll be like a potential sort of competition to our business who will sort of come about because there is just enough investor interest, and there's a lot of people who are now seeing that it's an interesting problem to solve.
Right.
But the reality of it is that as you execute, a lot of banking is around trust. So
right.
It takes a lot of time to build that trust with bankers, because they are ultimately custodian of customers' money, right? So
right.
For all the right reasons, regulatory also, the governance cost of running some of these businesses extremely high compared to what it was like 5 or 6 years ago, right? You need to have compliance, you need to have, and increasingly security is is a big component of everything that you do. So the challenge, not so much that we face today, because we've gone through that journey, a few years ago, is around how do you make sure that when you're a very young business, how do you make sure that you are bank grade as or military grade, as they call it, from infrastructure and how you run it and all of that. But at the same time, be nimble enough, right? So the moment you start putting guardrails, the nimbleness sort of goes away, right? So if you have to say that there are 5 people you have to review a tech, release, which means that you're probably staggering for a few days, right? So that balancing is still not there. So banks have been rigid in terms of how accommodative they can get in some of this, is largely because how people's motivations are also driven, right?
Right.
If your job is to get this done, you don't have to apply business logic as to why it can be done differently. That creativity has never been given that license, which is what I feel as constraining. So newer companies that are coming into the fray now will find that extremely hard, right? And I'm sure entrepreneurs will find ways to hustle, go to, and go figure it out some way. But that's one big challenge. The other challenge is in markets like India, making money is impossible. So it kind of, everybody wants a Ferrari at the cost of a Fiat. So you can't, you just can't be seen. And so therefore, if you're building out something where, there is meaningful value, your contracts never get repriced higher because the business has scaled. They expect you to sort of cut down further, right? So if you are going, an assumption is saying, let me win this mandate, it's important for me to have that business. If it scales, highly unlikely that you'll make more money out of it, right? So therefore, I see a lot of founders who are, essentially in that hurry to get that win, pricing it appropriately, right? So that's it's a big challenge in general in banking in India. So one or two of them are not like a little bit more okay, but broadly speaking, it's very hard. That technology business cannot be bought like vegetables.
Right. So Madhu, in fact, I'm going to come to the business model bit in business model related questions, right? And there is one that I definitely want to ask you, right? Because that's essentially something that you alluded to in your point, right? And that's around the changing relationship, right, between institutions and technology enablement and infrastructure companies, right? But I'll just come to that, right? Before that, I want to understand, and the one thing which is very, very clear is that even when you, for example, onboarded a banking partner, right, for example, right, or financial institution, right, as a whole, and I'm putting all of that in one bucket, right? Usually, and like you said, right, there is lack of creativity, and people are essentially out there to sort of solve a problem, and it's very, very mechanical in many ways, right? One thing becomes a problem is that even when there is a buy-in from the top level, right, it just becomes so much more difficult to navigate internally, right? What's been the customer onboarding journey like, right? I mean, what are typically, how long are the cycles, right? How much time does it take? Financial institutions, like I said, also have to operate within a certain statutory guideline, right? Where it just becomes very difficult, right? And it's extremely cumbersome, right? For an early stage company, an agile company, I think it just becomes very, very cumbersome as a process, right? Tell me a little more about the consumer onboarding process that is followed at Empathy.
It is a challenge. I mean, our assessment is it takes about 8 to 12 months to get started with a business, with a bank. And that time used to be maybe about 15, 16 months, 4, 5 years ago. So we have cut down by like 40, 50%, but we still have a long way to go. I think there is, and the nature of a business is also such, it's not earth-shattering, and there's not like millions of dollars of revenue for somebody. Even if the retail, banking business head signed up with it, he's going to leave it to other power centers within the bank. There's technology, there's operations and all that. So it has been improving. I would not say that it is not improved, but it's not ideal. It's not at the ideal sort of state, right? So we would, it should move faster. So again, going back to the same analogy that I gave, right? So if you want to do something, can you go online, go figure it out and just do that, we are still very, very long away from a time away from that. It's not just an India phenomena. We see this. We have operations all the way from Australia to Egypt. So we see this like in other markets, it's even more harder. So, it's extremely hard to convince the bank, get them to start working with you. But we are at a point where we can kind of, in some places we can charm them, some places we can create FOMO, some places where, we kind of use, investor sort of connects to make sure that we go to the top and set the tone at the top. Right. The combination of that, we could, and a lot of entrepreneurs also sort of have found that way to get going.
Very, very interesting. Madhu, I'm going to talk about the business model, something that I kind of, I've been wanting to ask you, right? And I kind of mentioned to in economics, there's a term called abnormal profit zone, right? And now I am a big fan of that entire concept, right? Because that just helps you understand, for how long can this business go, right? And charge an abnormal price, right? And typically the theory is that, there is competition which will catch up and then the prices will start to normalize, right? Now, when you're talking about an enterprise business, right? When you're talking about SaaS businesses, and that you're talking about that domain, right? Now, typically what happens is, while of course, there are a lot of people who are raving about, what's the possibility, valuation, so on and so forth, right? One thing which becomes very critical is that, one, of course, there is a competition side pressure that comes in, right? Second is also cost of doing business, right? I think which every business is extremely sensitive about, right? Thus, it becomes important for them to, squish that cost, right? And kill that cost as quickly as possible, right? Especially when you're an arms supplier, right? Where you're enabling that business. It just is a very difficult place to sort of operate in, right? Many companies which are essentially operating in that new, within that domain, right, are now kind of changing their business model. Right? Now, from being a player, which does a vanilla pricing for the product, right? It could be one-time pricing, it could be ongoing pricing, instance-driven pricing, and many other models that are there, right? It's now changing into a very different kind of an ecosystem, and that partnership is now kind of evolving into a profitability partnership, right? Or efficiency partnership, like it's been put up across certain white papers that are kind of floating around. So there are many new companies which are evaluating this as a possibility, right? What's your thought on that, right? I mean, from the existing model that you have, I'd love to know a little about the existing model that you have with these institutions, and is there a change in business model that you see coming up, say another year, 15 months, 2 years down the line, right? Is there a shift which is going to happen?
Sure. Yeah, I think what there are 2 or 3 aspects to this, right? One is we've always kept it as we have never gone on the cost side. We have always been optically, we would say that we are contribution margin positive because we are taking opportunities to the bank and saying, hey, this revenue is something that is not there with you, right? Without naming the bank, we today contribute almost 30% of a very small bank's balance sheet, right? So therefore now we are at a point where they need us more than we needing them. It's something that the bank also is sort of cognizant that we are adding incredible value without any capex or any very, very marginal people, right? Somebody who's already doing some job, is going to do a little bit more, or maybe 1 or 2 operations resources and all that. So therefore, there's a clear sort of thesis that has been established that we are like contribution margin positive. We add to the bottom line directly, right? So that's one aspect. The second and the softer intangible is around to be seen as a fintech friendly bank, right? Which is very important in your shareholder updates, in your stuff that you do. If a small bank is able to go across and work with let's say a large consumer internet company, it will win, right? So you're basically competing with unfair sized competition, right? So that's the second more on the softer side, but it's a very, very important aspect because banking doesn't stop at one transactional product. It kind of builds into a relationship over time. That's the first aspect. So therefore we've always put this out as a share of revenue than being on the we be on the profit side of the business than the loss side of the business, right? So that's one aspect that has worked well for us. The other is to kind of start layering in different pieces of that revenue rather than just having it as one abstract line item. Will allow you to, like, for example, I could sort of say that let me take a target to build your balance sheet to X crores over Y months. And then if I'm able to get there, give me an incentive and things like that, right? So we have to get creative. We've kind of tried to be creative around how we can extract that value without upsetting the sort of execution sort of a part of it. And also we have been able to balance it with multiple banks. So bankers also know that if we are squeezed too much, there is that whole,
Right.
we have alternatives that are sort of out there, right? So, I mean, not to use that as a leverage, but the fact that if you're building that business, it can't be a win-lose partnership. So if there's a fintech and us and the bank, it always has to be a win-win-win sort of deal. So that we have been kind of able to establish. But there's obviously pressure when banks do their own product, right? Like, for example, if we do a fintech which is doing BNPL, work with a bank, bank also wants to run a similar product of their own. Obviously, they'll try and say, give it to us at this cost, that cost, because I have other cost elements that go in. It's in some ways is a give and take, and we still haven't got to pricing maturity, in the sense that it's not established. You don't have like a market operating price. It's still done, hush hush on a deal by deal basis. That will probably take some maturity, but we things that we don't do, right? We don't cut corners or reduce our cost just because somebody else offered. We said, we kind of believe that for the price that we extract, or there is enough value that is there on the table. So therefore we would never go into saying, somebody offered like at 15-20% discount, we would not match it, right? So I mean, that's probably because we are at a point where we have that execution prowess to sort of back us. Somebody coming in new might want to win that business, so there will be some of these pricing pressure. It's perfect competition, right? There will be a bunch of players will come. There will be consolidation that will happen. We don't want to price ourselves lower and make it unviable, and that's to do with our DNA as an organization, because we started bootstrapped. We would never do things where we lose money on the day, right? So therefore I think we preserve that that DNA to ensure that we don't do stuff just because we want to win that business, right? So that and most SaaS businesses are like that, right? So you look at the poster boy today, Freshworks, they have not discounted and got their way in. They fought tooth and nail with the Salesforce and all of these guys out there in the US, won that mandate. You have to innovate on the product, keep moving the goalpost vis-a-vis your competition, and that's the only way to sort of survive.
Fantastic. No, awesome. I think that's I typically avoid asking questions on competition, right? I mean, and referring to competition, because I think everybody has a different narrative, right? But I think you've kind of beautifully touched upon, your thesis, right, of handling competition, and I completely agree, right? And I think gone are the days where you could, I mean, you have to be like, I think creativity has to be at your DNA, right? I mean, you cannot continue to just fight it out on a pricing model, because that's not a sustainable model beyond a certain point, right? I think knowing what you want to essentially offer, and I think winning in that relationship, I think just makes it so much stronger. Madhu, I'm gonna, I think any conversation today, cannot really go without talking about COVID, right? I think COVID has been a very unreal event, right? Of course, it's touched us in many ways, right, at a personal level, each one of us, right? But from a business standpoint, I think it's just kind of changed the narrative, right? And it's just changed how we looked at things, right? It's just brought in, very different kind of a realization in terms of how technology is going to empower and enable pretty much every single thing that individual is going to do, right? I mean, it's happening for a certain strata right now. It's going to happen at a larger level. We're going to have 700 million people, who are going to be actively sort of engaging, buying, consuming, right? All of that, right? We're going to be part of that transaction there. The pressure on the entire infrastructural play is going to be very, very different, right? What do you make out of an event like this? I mean, has this moved the needle for you quicker, faster than what you'd anticipated? What is the sense of it, right? I mean, how is the banking institution, for example, looking at this entire entire event?
Sure. Yeah, I think somebody famously quoted like a decade happened in a year, right? So that's that's the summary of what banking has gone through. I think there are 2 or 3 nuances to it. One is the fact that a lot of, if you just look at India itself, right, the way UPI has sort of grown, all of this has just added fuel to that growth, right? In terms of like, I would have never expected my mom to use QR codes, and where she has never used, she's kind of leapfrogged not using the debit, right? So because that fear of getting infected was so very apparent, right? So you're using your phone, scanning your QR, you're making it, and you're kind of even when you're buying grocery, right? So I think these are habits that are not going to go back, right? Because we just got used to it. So that's one incredible sort of outcome thanks to COVID and how it has happened. The second and the more serious thing is that there's a massive amount of inefficiency that that go in regulated financial institution. To give you an example, if you're let's say a supplier to a public sector bank, the decision makers are typically GMs and executive directors.
Right.
So you will spend half a day making one meeting of 30 minutes. You go there, those guys are busy, you stand outside. Today, if they're not joining the Zoom meeting, you get on with life, go to the next work and get things. So I would attribute 25-30% more productivity that has happened just because of the fact that things are remote, right? And the reality is that a lot of even public sector institutions actually have gone about doing business digitally, right? So in the sense, doing these meetings online and stuff like that. So, which is a great outcome. It is in our Babu culture, I would have never expected this to happen a couple of years ago, right? They don't take calls. You have to go meet in person and do that, right? Not even a telephone call could work, right? In some of these places, it's just the way they are. The third and the more nuanced aspect around the business itself is the fact that at every level you are trying now. People are asking about how do we digitize this? How do we bring efficiency? Whether it's regulator looking at it, businesses looking at it, processes that are being seen at. That is a phenomenal outcome as far as the entire ecosystem is concerned. Right? So we now are talking about home loans being done entirely digitally because there's a public good infrastructure that is enabling it. Right? This doesn't happen, for instance, in like Vietnam or Philippines where we operate. But in India today, if you have to set up a business that can most parts of the banking, you don't need a branch. Right. Other than the people want to go dump cash and all that, you can run the most products digitally, which I think if there was no COVID, it would have never happened. Right? So that's and that is probably in a long-term view, in my mind, is the biggest sort of benefit out of COVID. And our business we are one of the benefactors of this whole thing. So we aren't complaining. I mean, obviously, had our personal challenges, but that apart, I'm saying.
Interesting. Madhu, towards the end of the conversation, right? And I think no conversation can come to a close, right, without understanding, the 2-3 year aspiration, right? I would have loved to ask you a 5-year question, but I think we're just in unreal time, right? I think 2 years just is a little more visible, right, and possibly is a little more constant than a 5-year plan, right? So I think I'm gonna stop short at a 2-year question, but also love to know about international aspirations, right? I mean, international markets are kind of especially in the fintech space. I think we are becoming a playbook for many other countries, right? And not just for the developing countries, who are smaller in size, like whether Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, certain European countries, but also larger countries, right? They're kind of looking at India, right, and wanting to sort of adopt pieces, features, right, to improve their own infrastructure, right, so that they can play it much faster, right? Of course, they have to deal with lesser issues of homogeneity, right, where they're a slightly more complicated economy, right, in that ecosystem, with, of course, inadequate education on the financial side of things and stuff like that. But I think those are different challenges. But what are the next 2 years like, right, including your international aspirations?
Sure. Yeah, I think we are, we kind of doing, decent work in India. So we started going international just before COVID hit. Obviously, it's been sort of constrained a bit because we couldn't travel, our inability to travel and all that. But most markets today look at India, and I keep telling this: India will be the fintech factory of the world, right? The models that are getting built in India, China had a runway with mobile and whatnot, but you don't have a Chinese product. I don't think they'll get entry here. But I think we have created a democratic sort of fintech ecosystem in India, right? For lack of a better word. So I think a lot of business, and when we go to other markets, people are very interested to know how this got done, that got done. And a lot of this is is because it got enabled through macro, playbooks that have got built over the last 10 years, right? Like, identity, payments and all of this. And it's kind of coming together in some ways. But what we are able to sort of draw in is to show these success stories. And we also have population to our advantage. We could say that, hey, by the way, this product is 10 million people, and if it just take any market in the Middle East, most markets are sub 10 million people, right? So it's a few million people who are out there. So these are scaled at country scale, right? It's not, so therefore every product or fintech idea that you can sort of point to will already be at an operating country level or more, right? And the sell becomes kind of easier. So we don't see a lot of competition in the way that we are operating. So therefore, for us, it's more about our ability to execute in a bunch of these markets. We're currently present in about 7-8. By the end of this fiscal, we'll probably be in 15 markets. That at least we are hoping to sort of do. and potentially go out and make this a public company in 3 or 4 years. Yeah. So like you said, we'll take it every 18 or 24 months and see from there where we go.
I think with the way the Siddhi of Freshwork listing, I think has a solid impact, right? And I like with the positivity with we are kind of approaching it, right? And I think a very clear aspiration in terms of wanting to get listed, right? I think that's like that's where you really do the value creation, right? I think that becomes the standard, right? And the benchmark in many ways. Madhu, my last question, and I'm sure you've been questioned on this on many occasions, right? Is I typically, and this is for many founders, will not say necessarily from the fintech ecosystem. This could be a question in general, right, or relevant to people in general, right? But I usually ask, my guests, right, around advisor suggestions that they have for many other founders, right? Because I think every journey is unique, every learning is very unique, every individual is very unique, right? The way we deconstruct and construe environment around us and information around us is very different, right? Thus it becomes important, right? I think every advice becomes important, every suggestion becomes important, and I would use this discussion, my last question, as the question for people at large, right? What would that advice and suggestion be, right? For many founders, who are out there, I think aspiration is kind of peaking in India. I think there are a lot of people who are wanting to start out. There are a lot of people who already started out. It's not an easy journey. It's a difficult one, right? What is that one piece of advice that you have for many out there, right? That they can continue to they can imbibe, and which could help them build a solid company for their stakeholders.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no better time to start up in India than now. I think it's it's phenomenal as a market. It's very rewarding to build a business. But anyway, irrespective of the outcomes, I think just the journey of piecing together, getting people, seeing them succeed is entirely fulfilling. But I think somebody sort of told me this a few years ago, and which has kind of stayed with me for even now, is the fact that as a founder, we should always sort of think about what is activity and productivity.
Right.
Tasks that you do which are not value accretive to the company, you should just give it up to someone, right? Very simple thing like driving to office, right? If a driver could be hired for $20,000 and you're going to spend 2 hours driving, that's absolute incredible waste of your time, right? So you could do phone calls, you could do review meetings. Very simple, but a very profound sort of advice that I got, that anything that you do which is repeating over 3 days is an activity that you can give it to somebody else, right? You can control, you can track, you can monitor. And I've been, following that to the T. So any tasks other than obviously relationships that are there, client meetings, all of those which are important to the business, kind of is kept out of this. But the more the founder frees up his time, it is better. Burnout can get pushed out, right? Nobody can, sort of control outcomes. Nobody can say you'll get funded. All of that is events that are beyond your control.
Right.
But what you're in control of is your time, which is of absolute value. And if there's one advice, since you said like this, if there's one advice, I would say optimize for your time over anything else, right? So if there is something that can get to people, you should just let them do it, right? Get good people and get out of their way so that they can just operate freely.
Super. Madhu, how I wish this conversation could go on, right? I mean, and I usually end up saying this by the end of each conversation that I have, right? But this was an incredible one. I mean, there are many questions that I have, and I would love to continue on those questions, but I'm going to save those questions for our next interaction and hopefully soon, right? Thank you so much for taking the time. It was a pleasure to have you with us. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I think with a lot of things that you're doing, right? I mean, surprisingly, I have been meeting some amazing founders, right? I think with the calm and the focus that they're kind of they're kind of working on building a solid, sustainable, company which is doing incredible value creation for not just their investors, but I think people at large, right? It's phenomenal, right? And I think this is possibly one such conversation, right? What I'm taking away from this conversation is a lot of calm, a lot of maturity, right? And a lot of patience and persistence, right? Which I think is very critical for building, I think, any business, especially in a complicated market like India, right? Madhu, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you with us.
Ashu, thanks so much for having this. Love this. Yeah.
Thank you.